Hello and welcome to Kinship Earth Connections. I'm Lauren Archer, your host and Executive Director of Kinship Earth. On behalf of our founders, Susan Davis Mora, Walter Mora, and Stephen Gomes, our advisory team, our donors, members, and extended community of kindred spirits, thank you for being with us today. Before I introduce our featured guest, Hank Patton, I want to give you just a brief overview of this KINS network phenomenon. For over 40 years, Susan Davis Mora has established over 40 KINS innovation networks of heart-centered earth advocates who are working all over the world to raise consciousness, to transform our global economy and systems from fear and greed to generosity and love. Kinship Earth is the next evolution of KINS Innovation Networks, where we are building upon the foundation that Susan has already established and connecting individuals across networks to make rapid advances at this critical time. At each Kinship Earth Connections event, we introduce members of the KINS alumni community to share progress on their initiatives, help facilitate introductions and strategic alliances, and foster our growing community as one global network. Today, we're delighted to welcome Hank Patton, founder and steward of the Little White Salmon Biodiversity Reserve. Let's take a moment to watch this brief video about what Hank and his partner Candy have established on the Columbia River Gorge in Washington State.
Good thingy, Buzzy! Come on, Buzzy! Everybody, hi, Diamond. This is a set of farm and forest lands protected by a group of thoughtful parents and investors and biologists and farmers back in the 70s who wanted to see a learning space for kids at an ecosystem scale. Derived from a Portland project called the Sacajawea Living Lab and the Bridgehouse Voluntary School, where we discovered that kids would work their tails off if you took the time to find out what they were really interested in. What they really wanted to do was build a school from the ground up all by themselves. So when a chance came to buy the first farm in the Gorge here in the 70s, mid-76 I think it was, I asked my class at Sacajawea Elementary School in our science lab, should we buy this farm? And they said, yes, let's do that. And now we're 40 years later, and farm, forest, honeybees, greenhouses, lots of gardens, and thanks to you, a beautiful patch of flax for our flax project. And the intent is to equip kids with the ability to solve problems, to take care of the earth upon which everything depends, and be present, to be happy in a planet where a stewardship-based economy is obviously missing and obviously essential. Come on, Buzzy, let's go.
As you can see, Hank's philosophy is all about connecting the stewardship of individual places to the survival of our only known living planet. The solution, of course, is teaching kids to find joy in enoughness and equip them with the stewardship skills that pass resources to the next generation. In a 5-day international gathering at the Esalen Institute that focused on the externality problem, the hard nut of extraction-based economic systems, a meeting that included Amory Lovins, our own beloved Susan Davis Mora, the late and extraordinary visionary Hazel Henderson, and other thought leaders, Hank introduced a science-based framework for a business partnership with future generations. His key insight is that there is more real wealth to be created by managing resources as though the future mattered. And he argues that there is a science-based approach that can give businesses today access to the sustaining wealth created for tomorrow. Known formally as the Intergenerational Finance Framework, or IGF, Hank is going to give us a brief, high-level overview today. So let's give a warm Kinship Earth welcome to Hank Patton. Hank, thank you.
Hello, everybody. How's my audio?
Excellent.
Okay, glad to hear it. It's a pretty special moment in the history of the only known living planet. I'm sure you all share that sense of opportunity, which of course is written in the Chinese character as risk and peril as well. But the opportunity, I think, always has to be translated into caring for the individual place. Because as much as abstractions and theories and common denominators are important when you make calculus, the fact of the matter is, as my dad used to say, you have to put your pants on one leg at a time. So what we're doing in this setting here is providing young people with a chance to actually practice the stewardship of everything, all of the flows. In fact, one of the exercises we love to do in this landscape is to ask kids to identify, when I say kids, I mean kids of all ages, to identify the flows that are moving through the space, through them, through the atmosphere, through the soil, through the kitchen, through the little watershed, which is the kitchen sink, where we argue that world order begins. And in that context, discover that what you really need to be happy and healthy and meaningful as a human in these crazy times, or in any time, are not, they're essential and they're critical, but it's not a long list. Obviously, we live in a world where big companies have learned how to manipulate scarcity, and a lot of people, and it's an economy based upon the manipulation of scarcity, as we discussed in a recent kinship seminar. But scarcity is not what Mother Nature is all about. Mother Nature is about abundance and generosity and the distribution of abundance. And if you have good water, and if you have a garden, and if you have a wall to keep the snow out and a roof to keep the rain off, and you have meaningful work, and of course, all of those factors together can create wellness, health, you're set up. You have a very rich and beautiful and interesting life ahead of you. That's the concept that Lauren just mentioned, enoughness. In our present economy, because of the structure of things, a lot of built environments and a lot of supply chains essentially squeeze money out of the system by making stuff scarce and expensive, easy to break, easy to lose, and forcing you to go back and buy it again, which is great for cash flow, but not necessarily good for a healthy planet, as we all know. So what I want to do is introduce to you a framework that we think at the local level will protect and enrich and develop the trees and the springs and the streams and the gardens and the forests that are near you, while building opportunities for kids that are near you, and also protect the big biodiversity reserve, which is called planet Earth. If you get out from 20 miles above this atmosphere and keep on going as far as you care to go, you're not going to find anything that's alive. Maybe 25 miles, you'll find some drifting things, but at 30 miles, it's very cold and lonely, no matter how much money or rocket ships you own. And as you keep going, of course, you realize that, oh my goodness, there's nothing out here, nothing but rocks and minerals. And that little blue spot, that little dot receding in the distance that's the place. That's where it's happening. That's where consciousness has evolved. And what an extraordinary treasure that is. So how do you turn that into an experience for a kid? Well, you say, if you could ride a bicycle straight up, how long before you're dead? And around here, the kids go like, oh my God, before we get to Portland. I mean, literally halfway between the farm and Portland, you're dead. That's how close the cold universe actually is, and how critical that membrane called the atmosphere is to the functioning of anything that's alive. The definition of the word paradise, the old meaning is, we always remember, of course, is garden. But what we forget is that it's actually a garden with a fence around it. And that's what our atmosphere is, of course. It's the membrane that keeps unfriendly things from trashing your garden, which is the only known living planet. So I'm going to share some slides with you, and Lauren will also share some links. If the idea of providing stewardship experience to young people, particularly young people who have never been in a garden or milked a goat or thinned a forest or grown a salmon and let it loose in a stream, if you'd like to provide that experience, there's going to be a link in the chat that will allow you to sponsor a work study scholar. We have great success with middle class and upper middle class families who can afford to get out of the city, but it's a challenge for kids from other cultures who don't have quite so many resources. So we deeply appreciate the folk who sponsor scholars, and I put a link in, or you will in a moment see a link from Lauren that is designed to make that opportunity possible. So now, if I may, Lauren, I'm going to share my screen.
You should be all set.
Okie doke. I'm trying. Okay, here we go. So this is a view down the Columbia River from the upper part of the wildlife refuge. We like to, I'll start by saying it's not just by luck that 16 pieces of land wound up being set in a permanent trust, protected as a learning watershed. In fact, a learning watershed was the title of an idea that I presented to Paul Allen, my goodness, 25 years ago. And he sent a guy to talk to me who said, this is the most complicated idea and proposal I have ever seen. What you need is a planning grant, and we don't do planning grants, so I'm sorry. But you know, I've been telling Mr. Allen he should do planning grants. So a week later, a check for $25,000 showed up in the mail. And that was the beginning of our ability to protect ancient forest and agricultural land at the crossroads of the Cascades and the Columbia River. A living classroom for research, demonstration, and applied stewardship learning. We are in a precarious place as a species right now, and our bad decisions are making a lot of other things precarious. So I'm going to show you here with an illustration why our preconceptions set us up for making bad decisions. So this is a combustible fluid, And I'm going to ask you, I'll make it easier. It's a multiple choice question. What do you get here? Knocks and socks if we burn this, or raspberries? Come on. Pete, knocks and socks or raspberries?
Not raspberries.
Thank you for illustrating my point. This is honey. And honey produces raspberries. But you were all convinced I was showing you a petroleum product, right? Here we are in the era of petroleum products. Which is going to last longer, honey production or petroleum production? I'll give you 3 guesses. And that's what we get. No raspberries involved. But there's a perception problem, a conception problem, which is represented by the fact that we believe there's a fundamental belief that we cannot solve this problem. So it's kind of like put on the blinders and have a good day, but how are you ever going to change a problem as big and obviously disastrous with so much momentum? And the answer is by having a different vision, for starters. And back in the time when we had the Esalen conference with Susan and Amory and Zhao Jin from Beijing and the head of the Swiss university system, Sasha Zendorn, and another 15 people, we hatched this premise that if you use science to measure the value delivered to the future, and if you used long-term financial instruments and competitive bidding to give a market to that value, now you could bring future generations into today's market as a buyer, literally as a client. But that's such a radical, dramatic, upside-down idea that even though UNEP, in their inquiry back 8 years ago, identified the truth in what I was saying, which you see in this quote here, which I'll read out loud: sustainability, more than anything, perhaps, requires intergenerational financial transactions. Yet, a sufficiently scaled and robust framework is in the main lacking today. And it still is in the main. When was the last time you got a check from future generations? But what's the value of not flooding Florida, just to name one large consequence that we're facing? So there is a surprising disconnection between the reality of what we're doing to the future and how much it's going to cost, and this steady as she goes, fill the tank and take the kids to school habit and mindset that is literally taking the kids to school and taking the school over the cliff. So here's what we call the spectrum of services, the spectrum of intergenerational services, with energy the fundamental platform, of course, upon which everything stands. You could say ecosystem is the next, which of course it is, except that humans are here. So humans are going to be busy, and they go into the ecosystem to create infrastructure and security. And if you are secure, you then begin to worry about the fact that the fire is making you cough, which is the wellness equation. If you can provide the security and the wellness, suddenly you have a framework in which you can begin to build culture. And ultimately, culture is based upon meaningful work and self-esteem and beauty and happiness and peacefulness and all of the amazing ways that we express the genius of the human experience, unless you're trapped in scarcity and being manipulated by a market based on money, which, by the way, is losing its value at about 10% a year. So what are our criteria for making decisions? Somebody want to guess? There's always this one. You should have ought to done it. It's a religious framework. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. You should brush your teeth. Your parents can create all sorts of arguments, but moral suasion only gets you so far down the path. Then there's regulation. We could pass a law that says you've got to brush your teeth, and we could go down that rabbit hole, but I'm not going to discuss it except to say that some of our major advocates of this idea of a partnership with the future come from the regulatory space, where they know that there's always a way around the regulation, and that you frequently get perverse incentives and upside down outcomes. But then there's self-interest. You want to do something. When you get up in the morning, if money is the deal, if then you want money for obvious reasons, you will go to work. But if your financial issues are solved, or it's Sunday morning and you want to do something else, then you're going to do that. And there's no regulatory structure or moral imperative that makes you do that. So there are, we argue that there are three, we call them the irresistible G's. And this is a bounce off the preceding slide. What are the three G's that are irresistible? The picture is one clue, but there's that one. It's hard to resist gravity, downhill all the way. Then there's things that want to grow on our planet. You really can't tell a tree not to grow. Sometimes they grow slower, sometimes they grow faster, but this planet is all about things that want to grow. So what's the third G? George? You've been in this already. You know what the third G is. Okay, we go there. Self-interest. But that's not spelled with a G. Well, in the marketplace.
Greed.
So if this is where, as Lauren said in her sweet introduction, this is where the idea of the larger value comes from. And I really want to drill down on that, because if you don't believe that there's more value created, serious value, measurable, take it to the bank value, if there were a framework for taking it to the bank, by serving the stewardship of the planet, there's more value there. So self-interest should work just fine. So here's an example of a stupid way to do things. You've got cheap natural gas, you've got propane, you've got a laundromat a half a block from a greenhouse, and they burn stuff up and waste stuff hand over fist left and right. What if you had an investor who wanted to straighten this out and create value? What would you do? So we put that question to a system science team at Portland State University, and this is what they would do. Same enterprises in sustainable collaboration. The laundromat is not only heating the greenhouse, but it's heating a sun mall that has student housing and businesses and coffee bars and people playing guitars. The waste heat is recovered and run back into the laundromat. The greenhouse produces biogas, which is used to produce hot water in the laundromat. You've got a very resilient system that operates when the lights are turned off. You've got solar electric and solar gain coming in, methane capture, resilience, zero carbon, zero waste, local work. The kids are employed in this system, by the way, collecting tips while playing music in this system, and you're feeding the local community. How many different kinds of value is created here that was being lost in this model? I mean, look at it. It's barren. It's cold. It's dead. It's alive. So here's how the framework works. This is intense, but it's just what we call the high-level spin. But I want you to see actually what we call the transactional framework. And we'll start with the status quo side. This is the way everything is right now. When we say equity is trapped, the folks who own this system, the lady with the greenhouse is afraid that the price of natural gas is going to go up, and that'll make her add another slot to her slot machines, and she can't afford to do that. That's trapped equity. The problem with when you're stuck, when you own something that you can't afford to change, accurate information is scary. The lady with the greenhouse, the guy with the propane-powered greenhouse, the lady with the laundromat, they don't want to know about climate change. There's a wonderful joke that Amory famously tells, that it's amazing what a man will not know if you pay enough to not know it. It's amazing what a man will not know if you pay him enough to not know it. So trapped equity is where that problem comes from. And there is, and by the way, if you own a petroleum refinery, imagine what's going to happen in terms of not knowing things and paying people to not know things. There's a lot of risk because the politics of green and markets for green are unstable. So you milk your cash cow and you hoard the cash. This is what's happening right now. The indicators, and those of you who are interested in the green marketplace will be tracking the fairly, it might be called a meltdown in the ESG, environmental sustainability governance metrics world. The metrics are confused. There's a certain amount of greenwashing that undoubtedly is going on. People don't do their homework, et cetera, et cetera. So there's, and the view is backwards. You're looking backwards. So it's a rear view mirror as opposed to looking forward to value creation. There's little capital or profit for long-term goals. If your company invests in the long term and your competitor doesn't give a hoot, guess what? You're going to lose market share. And the bottom line is the future does not have any agency. There's no way they can invest in us. So let's think about another way of doing that. Instead of equity being trapped, how about a long-term financial instrument that supports the voluntary early retirement of dirty assets, legal dirty assets, not just the infrastructure, but also the employees? What if you could get a long-term contract plus insurance that guaranteed an MRE, a minimum return on your equity, in the same way that we insured the companies that invested in the moonshot, the mission to the moon? What if the standards for long-term outcomes were third-party science-based and vetted using life cycle measurement tools? And what if you could securitize, bundle, and sell those outcomes, wellness outcomes, biodiversity outcomes, employment development outcomes, water quality outcomes, all of which have, and onward, the list is, there's 149 in the Sustainable Development Goals published by the United Nations. So there's lots of ways to do this, except there is no transactional framework, because you need private capital, not public capital. The public has a very important role to play, but private capital is where all the money is. It's where most of the capital is. It's also unconstrained. Private capital can move very rapidly, particularly if there is long-term contractual opportunities with minimum guaranteed returns. If you're protecting a watershed, those returns pay out for as long as that watershed functions and serves the communities and ecosystems that depend upon it. So the framework is got to be an ecosystem scale redevelopment district that provides competitive, transparent, primary and secondary markets for social and environmental outcomes, that allows you to capture the spread between the dirty old system and the clean new system. The future is now your client. So here's how you measure that stuff. This is a dirty old system. In fact, it was the Mojave coal generating plant, which shut down for other reasons. And here was what we proposed at the time, a clean solar alternative. And at every point in these histograms, you have a delta or a spread. And you can, most of these, you can measure or provide a market for the value that you create by not dumping methylmercury into the human economy and the food system, which causes mental retardation, IQ loss, cardiovascular problems, premature male mortality, and onwards. And over here, just the state of, I believe it was the state of Missouri, we used their data for this chart. The health costs imposed annually by mercury on the US system 10 years ago was $34,000 per pound, just in heart problems. Now, at $34,000 a pound, not dumping that toxin into the atmosphere looks like a pretty good deal. But when you add up the many different outcomes, including asthma and its effect on school and so forth, and this is what we call revenizing, or turning the externality into revenue. Suddenly, you've got a spreadsheet that can be turned into long-term contracts. And these outcomes can be bundled and sold in secondary markets. So I'm going to quit right there. Maybe actually I'll go back and as part of our chat, let me go back to the, actually I'll just quit right there. So how about that for a romp? What do you think, Pete? You ready for a short exam?
Sure, that very good presentation. Yeah.
So this is the part of the conversation where we're going to open up the floor. And I, for one, am absolutely blown away. This is some high-level advanced thinking. And so I know that the people in this room are high-level advanced thinkers. And so it's an honor to open up the floor. So George, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Hank. And thank you for your decades and your extensive work with Amory. And you guys are just heroic in your vision and what you see for the future of the planet, which is very aligned with what Buckminster Fuller was interested in doing as well. So I think that, as you outline, nature has this ability to provide cascading benefits if we get out of the way, if we work with those systems instead of not. And my question to you is, I have no doubt that all these systems work, because that's how we got here. Bucky talks about the billions of years of evolution of the cosmos and us being stardust, and all of these things coming together to create this beautiful living planet and support consciousness. So when I look at what's happening politically, we're not changing at the speed of our learning. We learn about the ecosystem. We have the indigenous and original peoples that have, been treasuring the ecosystems for thousands of years and are part of it. And we have that relationship with it as well, except we're disconnected. Our main issue is that for some reason, at some point, we got on this fear scarcity trip. And education's part of it, but you look to your leadership to make decisions for you that then allow you to survive and learn and fall in line with the things that the guide is telling you to do and helping you see. It's what coaching is. And I just seeing that our leadership is just absolutely incapable of doing this. And part of it is this greed issue where, you know, how much will a person not know if you pay them enough to not know it? We gave $5.9 trillion of subsidies to the oil companies in 2020. We have spent globally since the 1950s, 79 trillion on weapons. If you look at the history of racism and you know, this whole thing about skin color, Bucky talked about the fact that our skin is, you know, in very aligned with photosynthesis in plants, in that we absorb vitamin D. If we get too much, it's bad for us. If we don't get enough, it's bad for us. The skin color is a genetic adjustment to the amount of skin your body is likely to be exposed to based on where your genetics were developing. So that's it. I mean, we shouldn't have any other conversation about skin color and race, but we get stuck in these things that hold us back. So how do we most efficiently move humanity to a place where we're truly aligning objectives and incentives and, you know, telling people, hey, you don't really need to fear nature. Nature will support you if you just give it a chance. Your big issue is, you know, following people that want to keep you in a state of disempowered slavery.
Well, that's quite the question, George. That's why I've learned in talking and introducing people to some of these new paths, is I start with the key insight, and we even call it a key insight, and I even asked Lauren to underscore and say it very slowly when she made her introduction. How many of you right now instantly can remember what the key insight is? The key insight is that we create more wealth when we serve the future than we do using the model that we're using. The problem is that wealth doesn't show up in the bank account of Valero Petroleum Corporation. It winds up distributed across healthy ecosystems and healthy communities forever, for as long as you choose to run the calculation, because the planet's been alive for a long time, and we're a very recent experiment on this planet. And we're basically, candidly, canceling the experiment because we don't give a doggone about the rules, the way the game has to be played, which is you pass resources forward, increased in abundance and fertility. That's the way the game has been played for millions of years, and to presume that it's going to change because we're human beings and arrogant, I don't think so. So the answer to your question is, and pardon me for sounding cold-blooded about this, but remember I talked about the three reasons for behavior, and the third G, they're both the same. We behave in ways that serve our best interest. So do chickens and mountain lions. And greed, which is an uncool expression of that. My chickens eat enough, they don't eat everything. The reason why we don't behave in a sustained and modest way to protect the capacity of ecosystems to be fruitful is that ecosystems don't write us checks. And we've got all these hungers developed by a very, very sophisticated global system of seduction that draws us into buying things on time that we have absolutely no need or reason to buy, except they manage to sell it to us. So the truth is, if we could get access to that longer value, and if we could set up a structure for allowing even, dare I say, the immoral corporations that are destroying the system to have access to capital to rebuild their immoral, destructive systems. There's actually enough value in the future to make that possible. In other words, as much as I have, frankly, contempt for the parasitic behavior of these big corps, their behavior is parasitic and they're killing the planet. So we have to come up with a way to change the game. And the way you do that is to have a capital fund that is so large that they can afford to draw on the contract privileges that come with completely becoming harmless. Harmlessness becomes profitable when the future is in the market as a buyer, because they don't want harmful systems. And science can tell you what that is. Finance can make money with it. Local communities can rebuild themselves with it. You can design the system, the science-based metrics. You can use the book of outcomes and go to town designing and building radically efficient, clean systems that support your children and your neighbors' children and the salmon coming upstream to say hello.
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to require us looking at insurance, actuarial data, and showing people that the risk, when you look at systems-wide, business continuity, community resiliency, health, and the fact that we can do this now, and it's much more profitable, both from a lifestyle standpoint and for a future standpoint. The disaster preparedness systems thinkers would be right in line with you, Hank, and right in line with Amory. And you know, but they only get talked to after there's a disaster, right? They don't get talked to in the planning part, and that's what we need to do. So thanks for your brilliant work, and look forward to working together and allowing some people to get their comments in too. Thank you.
Awesome. This is just so mind-blowing. Pete, you've got your hand up next, and then Teresa, and then Dr. Carmen.
Yeah, so what we're really talking about here is self-interest, is what needs to change in the rise of consciousness. So this economic system needs to be brought into consciousness as a possibility. And also humans need to wake up to the knowledge that instead of the closed loop of perception, and people who are stuck in the Maya of the world who are believing the propaganda in the media that kind of program their worldview, it's also the rise of consciousness. And once we understand that we're part of a much larger system, we're just like cells in our body, each perform functions. We're like cells in the body of the earth and the universe. And once people understand that they're part of a greater system, then your enlightened self-interest becomes about making everything you come into contact with better. And so I think this is a fundamental thing that needs to happen for humans to awaken to this new economic system, to awaken to see more of their potential, of how they can be more fulfilled by interacting with the world around them in positive ways. And whatever their gifts are, their highest purpose is going to be how they can facilitate this enrichment of what they come into contact with. And this is how their lives can have the most purpose. And so I really think that the enlightened self-interest is going to be a key part of this, so that people aren't locked into greed when they realize that abundance comes from their connection to everything they come into contact with, not what they can gather themselves. They have everything they need. The energy of the universe, the entire breadth of the universe is available to us each moment of existence. And the disconnect from that source is just so sad that people don't know how full they could be, because they're locked in this mindless scarcity and not enough mentality. So just bless you for doing this work, and everybody here who's interested in it.
Pete, if I might quickly say that one of the most powerful things we can do is to put a help wanted ad in the back of the paper. Although, how long's it been since you received the paper? The point is, if we, this is not a front page story. It's I've got a job for you. Would you be interested? Story, because there's an unlimited amount of work that needs to be done to restore these blessedly beautiful, abundant, rich ecosystems that we're killing so fast that we don't have time to name the creatures that we're making go extinct. So what I think we want to do is frame it as a full employment opportunity for the human race. The other thing I think we need to do is recognize that this is about community ecosystem partnerships, one at a time. If we get one of them to function well, like Finca Sagrada, then that's one. You know, if we get another one like this one going, that's another one. And there are communities that want to do this. They just don't have the guidebook. They don't have the metrics, and they don't have a buyer for those outcomes. But avoided carbon, if I'd have said to you 15 years ago, there's going to be a market for carbon, you'd just scratch your head. But now there's markets for all sorts of stuff, but it's not integrated across sectors. And there's not an ability to capture the spread between doing the wrong thing and doing a right thing, which, by the way, is very difficult to do if you don't have enough capital to actually retire that plant on the edge of town, the coal thermal plant or the refinery or the whatever it is, and replace it completely, including the jobs. But there is enough capital. It's just there's a perceived risk. The private sector doesn't want to jump into something. I mean, there is something in economics called first mover advantage, where you got there first, but there's also the reality that people who think something up, they call it the bleeding edge, right? That you had the idea and they waited until you went broke, and then they bought it on the dime and made $1 bazillion. So nobody wants to be on the bleeding edge, and the two guys in the garage is a lovely idea, but what we really need is a comprehensive sense that there is an investor who wants to transition places into abundance. And that's called jobs. And that, George, I didn't point to your question about politics, but the midterms, I think, are going to be about jobs, communities, and the opportunity to create security where there is right now a lot of insecurity, and a bunch of fascists running around with waving sticks is not a very compelling picture compared to West Virginia coal villages rebuilding themselves into sustainable eco communities and having the capital to do that, and a book of metrics that makes essentially a shopping list of value that the future has emailed to us so that we can work down that list and deliver those good things to future generations.
Well, Walter, would you do a quick check on the chat I just sent you? Sorry for the interruption.
That was directed to Walter, correct? Okay, thank you. All right. Yes, this is such, again, mind-blowing, because what I'm hearing is a way to measure value and build it into a system. And I know what you're wanting to create, Hank, is pretty vast, but you've got the infrastructure. And so it's really exciting to hear the conversation around this. I'd like to pass it over to Teresa McGlashan. Thanks for joining us, Teresa. Welcome.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciated hearing your presentation, Hank. And I want to just call out that we're in this game of always needing to shift consciousness alongside the possibilities, the options. And I see in unlimited possibilities that have been presented. I mean, the skill set, the ingenuity, the creativity, which you're modeling in the presentation that you've done. And the challenge, of course, is getting the consciousness to the point where there's the willingness to do this. And so I see also with your World Steward, you're working with the consciousness piece of children and families to, we're all doing kind of both things. Like, how do you implement it on the ground? How do you have actually living manifestations of systemic thinking and love living on the planet? And then how do we, and that shifts the conscious. It's a very interesting process that I've been aware of for forever, where some people focus more on the consciousness, some on the actual solutions. And it's very dynamic and very, challenging. And there's a great book that, if anybody hasn't come across it yet, called The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. Obama said it was his favorite book of 2020, I believe, just to give a little plug from a credible source there. I listened to it, and there were probably 10 brilliant actors and actresses reading the parts. It's really, how did we get from where we are now to a sustainable world? And so it involved a lot of suffering. It involved a lot of catastrophes, and we'll see. I mean, it's really fascinating to see, how does consciousness shift? What motivates people to actually think more systemically? What grows us from this adolescent planetary system, the adolescence that we're clearly in, to young adulthood, where we become accountable? So that's what really fascinates me. And I always appreciate when an organization has both the shifting, the consciousness piece, and then also the very practical boots on the ground. This is a way that we could do it. So my practical question that I would have is, you mentioned a capital fund that is so large that it would make it possible for people to retire, factories and processes that really aren't going to build a sustainable world. And I'm just curious where you think that would come from, Hank, what your vision is, and if that's a governmental fund, if you think insurance, where do you see that coming from? What are the possibilities just to plant that in the field?
A great question, and it's always one that comes up, and it's always one that needs clarification, and it's one that needs repetition, because I did mention that I do not believe that the role of government is to take on debt and then somehow pay companies to do a nicer thing, right? I just don't see that happening. What I do see is governments have a cost on the margin for many things. What that means is that they're already paying for a lot of sickness, and that's the cost right now. So if you can deliver wellness in a less expensive fashion, the government can certainly buy wellness rather than sickness. Of course, we have a sickness industry, not a wellness industry, and the transition is a very critical. Just one example of a critical transition. The capital is actually available. It is in the private capital markets. What is it, a $73 trillion global economy, of which a huge amount is, that number, put a bracket around it because I'm not remembering, and I'm sure my mind can hold numbers that big, but the estimated requirement for a serious attack on climate change is somewhere between $3 and $10 trillion a year. It's a lot of money, but it's also, for the first time, the green bond community has hit 1 trillion this year. And Sean Kidney, who's a friend of mine, who is the CEO of the Climate Bond Initiative, whom I briefed in the at the UN Foundation on this idea after one of his talks in DC. Sean accepts the premise that there are markets for co-benefits to green investment as a hypothesis. But right now, a green bond is a warm and fuzzy sustainable bond, depending on the issuer has better resolution, more rigor or less. A lot of them are being accused of being greenwashing. They frequently have weird things hidden inside them that, arguably somebody said a nuclear investment is a green investment. I think it gets pretty twisted pretty fast. riding a bicycle is great, but who pays you to ride a bicycle? It pays for itself. And communities that make it impossible to ride a bicycle safely have a problem. So there is an investment structure there that is not out of reach. And municipal bonds are quite available in terms of capital for rebuilding community infrastructure. And there's the global foundation community is looking more and more at structures that reward not just nice things, but nice things that create measurable reduced costs and reduced external impacts on the future or other communities. So, look, my point here is that I think the reason why the private global finance community does not release the capital that they have is that they perceive it as risky, unstable, immature. The market is immature, and that not very competitive with the traditional old stuff like coupon clipping and petroleum instruments, which make up a huge amount of even the global reinsurance industry's portfolio. The Climate-Wise Reinsurance Network, whose honorary chairman, I briefed a guy named Charlie who lives at a palace called St. James. The Climate-Wise Reinsurance Network, in its Durban statement, a call for climate action at the Durban Climate Conference, they at the time had a portfolio of $3.5 trillion, of which 95% was high carbon emitting. 95% of the reinsurance asset base was causing the problems that the reinsurance asset base was going to have to fix. What's wrong with this picture? So I think I will kind of exit this rabbit hole by pointing out that risk is the problem. Being an early mover in an immature market, which is where a lot of these green bonds are, people want to invest in green stuff, but they're not harmless instruments. They still have a very broad array of hidden costs, or you wind up building more trapped equity by making a big investment in something that wasn't such a good idea after all. We do know how to build life cycle clean, harmless systems. And we can do life cycle assessment. We've got all that dialed in, but they have a higher front end investment cost because you're paying for everything right up front. So we're building a 25 kW solar system here, and it's going to cost virtually nothing except some window wash to operate over the next 25 years. And but it's all front loaded. So the value is delivered over 20, 30 years. The current market doesn't see beyond about 90 days at the longest. It's all about short-term cash flow. So if we can bring the future as a buyer into the contemporary market for the co-benefits that are delivered to that market, the future, you're using good science to measure those co-benefits, global finance would love to buy that stuff. So I think it's important to emphasize that should be done as full systems, communities in their ecosystems, so that when you build one, it will run just like a forest for as long as the birds want to fly. And rather than trying to spread it out over 1,000 cities, a little dribble at a time, it's better to encourage the community to build a design partnership based on the metrics of outcomes that serve the future and the metrics of outcomes that hurt the future, and capture the spread, bundle and sell that spread in secondary markets. It's called securitization. The business world knows all about it, and but they need rigor in the metrics, and they need, as George said, insurance that protects them from surprises. First mover advantage has a very high risk track record, and it's great to be first, but it has some problems associated with it. And that's why when Kennedy sent us to the moon, he didn't say, we're going to do this if I can do it for less than, X billion dollars. He said, we're going to do this and we'll do whatever it takes to do it. As we design and build systems that are radically clean and efficient, we're going to get better at it. But that doesn't mean the ones that were not perfect should be penalized. Who was it who said, get out there and make as many mistakes as you can and make them as fast as you can, but don't repeat them. Look at the history of the wind industry. Remember Altamont Pass when the first generation was there? None of them are there now. But because of those systems, we now have pretty efficient, even bird improved wind systems. And it took we had to make a lot of mistakes to get that operational. Enough of that. That was a great question. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Hi, Liz.
I see that Dr. Carmen has her hand up. Teresa, is that complete, your question?
Yes, of course.
Right. I'm going to lower your hand for you. There you go. All right. Yes. And let's hear from Dr. Carmen. And we have the honor of having the legendary Elizabeth Sartoris with us today. So hoping we have time to hear from her as well. Dr. Carmen, welcome.
Well, hello there. Thank you so much, Lauren, for reminding me of this amazing experience. And I am so glad. And I want to thank Hank for this extraordinary sharing of this amazing intelligence, knowledge, wisdom. And I'm with Teresa on the consciousness. Well, various of you that have spoken have mentioned, have spoken or zero in on consciousness. And I have a question, because I know we're running out of time, but I have a quick question for Hank. And the question, Hank, which is connected to Teresa's comments around consciousness, has to do with how do we bring this conversation to the little people, to society at large? Because I have an MBA in corporate finance. So this is a corporate finance conversation, really. But how do we translate this into a personal finance conversation and getting to the core of consumption at the retail level? How do we use our money? And I remember, Hank, when I first met you in the first session, we were talking about investments, and you said these types of investments cannot be looked at as a money deal. I remember that because I jotted it down. And when we bring it to the level of people, regular people, in personal finance and investments that they are making with their money, with their $50 a month or $100 a month, their IRAs, their 401ks, okay? How does this all translate? That would be my question.
Well, that's a great question, Carmen. Thank you so much. It's a real privilege to be able to exchange with you. I think let me drop down to with two quick responses. One of them is the number 25. When our work study scholars get here at the beginning of the week, we say, and don't forget 25, and they say, 25 what? And I said 25 wheelbarrows. Each of you will move 25 wheelbarrows or something or other flows in this ecosystem before you leave on Friday. And they roll their eyes like, wheelbarrows of what? Well, we're talking manure, compost, firewood, transplants, and zucchini. The point is, in the money economy, we forget how unbelievably generous nature is. I plant one zucchini seed, and how many do I get back 6 months later? What's the ROI on that one seed? It's so huge, it's almost beyond realizing. And that's, of course, what we call in economics, we call the zucchini problem. you got too much. How are you ever going to make money if you have too many zucchini, right? You know why they lock their cars in the churchyards in New England? It's because they're afraid that when they come out of church, their car will be full of zucchini. Anyway, I want to point at, I'm very glad that Ministry of the Future showed up as a book or an audiobook recommendation. I do the same thing. I've actually listened to it twice, and that's another discussion. Maybe, Lauren, you should have a book review session, but I'm thinking I would recommend to you all an audiobook and book by the founder of Health in Harmony, a Portland group founded by Kilani Webb, and her book is called Guardians of the Trees. And she is very much focused on communities where the average income, where she lives and works, and built medical clinics where folks pay for their medical services by growing seedling trees to restore tropical forests. For example, average income in dollars, $2 a day, where wellness is an outcome of not having a lot of money, but of living a life that is truly sustaining. And that's a longer answer than I should have given you, but let's pick that thread up, Carmen. Very important.
I'd love to just toss my hat in the ring with that too. I think there's a communications opportunity here to take that data, that information, and really polish it up so that it can be explained, maybe dumbed down just a wee bit for more of the average person to understand. So thank you. All right, George, and then Elizabeth.
Let's let Elizabeth go first because I've already spoken.
All right.
Aloha, everyone. I'm so sorry I couldn't come earlier. I came in right at that critical slide about the what was it, the laundromat in the greenhouse. Hank, it's such a pleasure, and I will look at your work much more closely now. Just last night, and thank you, Walter and Susan, for having Hank on. Just last night, I was saying to a friend, how do we get from this dirty old economy to the clean new one in ways where we're producing enough clean green energy to make the new things that we're trying to make? And can we make all the new things out of what's already here and recyclable rather than mining new ores and doing more heat beat treat kinds of economy? And so this is like an answer to a prayer here for you to talk. And some of my big questions, because I know I have to be fast as possible, is looking for examples where we might be able to inject this kind of an economy in one that's already reasonably aware, but not this well developed. I'm thinking of places like Mondragon in Spain as an urban cooperative, and Sarvodya in Sri Lanka as a rural bootstrapping operation. Both of those might benefit tremendously from people coming in like yourself to show them how they can make this more efficient. And then I think about the 13 of the 20 biggest cities in the world are at sea level. And the only one of those 13 that's even thinking of moving uphill and is making a plan to move uphill is Jakarta. If they're going to build a new city uphill, can we do it this way from the get-go? So these are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. BALI, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economy, I seeded the concept of living economies at Social Venture Network which quickly turned into 8 of us writing the first paper on living economies, and that turned into BALI, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies. How many of those that are active are really functioning in this way? Because the big governments are not going to do this. We don't have the time. Climate change is, we can get several meters of sea level rise overnight at any time, and we have still got a push at this last gasp of empire building to try to build a global empire and move us all into the most dystopian future they've thought up yet. So, Hank, I've just given you a load, and I want to stay in touch and see what we can do.
Well, it's a real privilege to be questioned by you, Elizabeth. I think you're right on the mark. Not everybody has the guts to look the dragon in the eye with that kind of clarity, but still remember the good work, the little good works, so many little good works that are underway. I'm going to end this statement by referring back to the slide that I showed at the end, the histogram that showed a dirty system with its many outcomes and the clean system with its many outcomes, and the revenization of the spread between those two. But I want to actually just, in the spirit of stories and anecdotes, to say, yesterday I was rebuilding, as Lauren knows, a pipe and plumbing system that distributes water to the north, the south, and the east side of our wildlife refuge. And of course, once I cut into that first pipe, I was betting my life on my good plumbing. But I went and bought the valves in town. So I arrive at the plumbing supply company, and there on the shelf, I have these choices. For $40, I could have a 2-inch irrigation valve. And for $65, I could have a lead-free freshwater valve for, in quotes, human use. Well, that spread between the 40 and the higher price is what future generations would pay for in a heartbeat, because they don't want lead in the water of the children that go to camp here. But I, as the science camp founder manager guy, have to eat it, right? Which of course I did with a little help from some sponsors. But the point here is that the world is looking at short-term solutions, and everybody's under so much pressure all the time that you have to be quite a resourceful philanthropist to be able to consider the future as a partner or as an important component in your daily decision making. Now, what I think we can do, if we have a catalog of metrics for serving the future, which is what the Sustainable Development Goals are, and what the ESG system in the investment world is supposed to be. If we have that catalog, we can send our kids bounty hunting for value to create in the future. And a local redevelopment district can hire those kids to deliver it with the organically grown pizza that they're delivering on the same bicycle. So my point here is that key insight that the larger wealth is out there, and that I don't think we're going to save every community on the planet, frankly. And over a beer, I might be even more cynical. But the point, I think, is we're not going to lose the human experiment unless we really delay. And then we might. But we're going to lose a lot of it, the way things are going. And by the way, that's how nature works. She chooses the ones that do better than the ones that don't do so well, which is why George and I are bald.
I just want to reflect back one thing. That was so funny. But the conversation we're having here is very much about what Susan has created over 40 plus years with KIN's Innovation Networks. And that is the people in the room who understand the concepts, that are willing to roll up their sleeves, get the message out, work behind the scenes, instead of, as George knows so well with the Buckminster Fuller Institute, instead of trying to change the existing system, it's like, let's just go in and create the new system and show how it works. And as Walter has been doing, and Susan with Finca Sagrada, and many of you in the room have been working with local, like Hank, but let's create the example and then scale it. So that's what I'm hearing. It's very exciting to be here. And then Walter has had his hand up and hasn't had a chance to speak. So I want to open the floor to him.
Yeah, I wanted to come to this from a little different angle. Most of you probably know I'm a biodynamic farmer. And one of the first things we do as a biodynamic farmer is create a farm ecosystem. So all our energy comes from the sun. It comes from this very moment, right? We're not relying on the past or thinking of the future. The plants are about 1.5% efficient in creating changing that solar energy into matter. And I just wanted to bring that up because I often think of that. It's very exciting. And the other thing is here in Vilcabamba, Watershed, we're trying to create a sovereign watershed with the help of the seeds tokens, crypto tokens. And that's another idea that turns everything upside down, because we can direct development with the help of these tokens. Like if we want people to farm organically, we can offer them tokens. You can still use the fiat currency, but we can offer tokens, and without going into all the details, because we're short of time, we can create a local economy. And anyway, I just wanted to bring those two things up because they're both, so helpful.
I want to quickly, I really enjoyed my visit to your cattle operation back when, Walter, and someday when I grow up, I hope to visit you guys down below. I think I watched this crazy, the crypto instability and the complexity associated with crypto mining. And I, as a farmer, and you, I'm sure you as a farmer, thinking about solar systems and living soils, the bottom line is that the farm delivers food. It delivers square meals. And I think because the public sector, the government, is giving away so much food to families that do not have the resources or the opportunity, or are caught in situations where they require that supplementary food sourcing. I think a square meal, and we did this for years. Those of you who'd like to know more about it, I'd be happy to share it with you. But we built an economy based on the idea that 1 hour of effort invested in the increasing the fruitfulness of the earth was worth one square meal. It was also worth 10 ounces of honey and a lot of zucchini. but we call that a protein standard economy. And it kind of gets away from the gaming that happens when digital systems get a grip, and it doesn't require. It's very place-based. We also allowed kids to trade tools for their square meals, and there are other ideas associated that are quite interesting. We're running out of time, but I want to quickly, may I share this last slide again, wherever I put it.
Please do.
Here we go. Thank you. Elizabeth, this is the tool we call it it's a suite, outcomposer and incomposer. Outcomposer is the histogram that describes the trapped investment. Incomposer is what proposes the alternative. And at every delta across the two, you can capture a measurable outcome, which in many cases, but not all, can be revenized or turned into an income that can be bundled and sold in secondary markets. I think this is the tool that Bali could use, and many of I'm totally with you around the cooperative movement, particularly the big Spanish one. What is it? Valdigan, Mondragon, a brilliant system that really has done a great deal. They, of course, have their challenges around equity in the labor force. Who doesn't? But my point here is that software, we believe, solves the problem of how you keep the metrics process, the metrics development process, independent of being bought and paid for by somebody with a huge amount of money that can buy in and take control and set up metrics that serve their whatever special interests, much as the petroleum world did. And we're willing to sell up to 45% to investors who want to participate in a software package that has to be on the desk of every resource manager on the only known living planet. But 55% would belong to a global independent Secretariat of Science Metrics for serving the future, essentially create a way by which everybody who bought that software would be paying into the fund that maintained that software forever. By the way, the acronym is pretty good. IC.
All right, George has his hand up again, and I noticed that Susan unmuted herself, so she probably wants to say a few words. I'll let you two.
Susan, go ahead.
No, George, you know what I think of you. Go, man.
Okay, so I think the key thing that we need to do right now is not to get bogged down in how our future is going to be serving the financial system. We should just show people how nature really can make this planet work. And then through generosity, knowledge, science integrated with indigenous wisdom, the regenerative farming practices, permaculture, and so forth, when we align with nature, those cascading benefits will come to us. And I think it's really important that we that have been toiling in this area and are inspired by it, is that we show that model irrespective of the financial system that it's associated with. Because when you show the model, then we'll figure out how to make money with it. Look, humans don't have any problem trying to figure out how to make money out of doing stuff. They can make money doing anything, whether it's harvesting, food, or using their bodies, or creating stuff, or just selling sizzle. So the money is secondary to the function. And I put Tom Chi's work in the chat. If you weigh all the ants on the planet and you weigh all the humans on the planet, the ants weigh 10 times, the ants are eating 10 times more than the humans. We weigh about the same amount, 350 million tons. So no one's complaining about too many ants. And it's because the ants do the ecosystem services. We can do the same thing. We're smart enough. And the idea of people having to go onboarding into a public school system, which I think is just an onboard into the prison system, and keep people out of flow, take those little children that, as Bucky said, every child's born a genius, we de-genius them. Let those geniuses connect their consciousness to the future and what the potential of nature is. We're going to be just fine.
Love it. All right, let's let Susan have the last word.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, my heart is beating out of my chest. And Lauren and Hank and George, oh my God, of all my years doing KINS, this is the most important KINS I have ever been in. You've nailed it. We have the people on this. Lauren, you just found the right people for this meeting. It's incredible. This is what we can do together. And Earth is ready for it now. Here's Walter and I, unknown down in this bizarre town, et cetera. And we're proving the model that's going to work all around the world. So the three of you, I'm asking you to put a key focus on this topic because it's for everybody and it's the most important thing. And Hank Patton, God bless you the rest of your life and whatever and beyond. And I've never been so excited. I could never see quite how, we could solve the world's biggest problem. This is it. And many of the people on this call are the key people. And Lauren, God bless you. I'll never stop thanking you for putting this together. God bless us all.
Well, Susan, it's all based on the work that you've been doing for so long and the seeds that you've planted. You are the attractor field, and so many people have shown up as part of that. And just a shout out to those of you in this room. There are people here who are experts in consciousness. There are people here who are experts in business and finance, and many are experts in both. Everyone is dedicated to making humans net positive to nature. We're all playing the world game. And so please share this message.
Thanks, Hank, for your thoughtful comments today. I really appreciate it. And as always, I was amazed with your ability to talk goat talk and call the goats to in a language I never heard before. Awesome. I want to know more about that.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, Hank. Thank you, Susan and Walter. Thank you for all of our guests for being here. And we'll see you at our next event.
God bless you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's Kinship Earth Connections event. We encourage you to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. To learn more and get involved, please visit us at kinshipearth.org.